All right, welcome to Forward Future Live. Today, December 19th, 2025. Of course, it's a Friday. Uh, I'm Matt Berman.
And I'm Nick Wentz.
We have an incredible lineup again, Nick. Doug Laughlin, excuse me, president of SemiAnalysis, Koray, chief AI architect at Google, of course, welcoming him back to the show. We have Logan Kilpatrick, group product manager at Google Deepmind, and very special guest, Abhishek Fatiporia, vice president of product at a little company called Robinhood. But first, let's get into some of the biggest news stories of the week. Take us away.
Yeah. So I think we should start. Obviously, this is going to be a live show filled with conversation around Gemini 3, specifically Flash. But let's talk about speed. Matt, one of your favorite topics.
Yeah,
Where are
I've
you
been
these days on the argument against speed versus accuracy?
I have been a speed maxi for a while. And I think I've been in the minority for a while, but Flash, Gemini 3 Flash really cemented my thinking here. When you have a model that is generally good enough at the vast majority of use cases, and it's also really fast, and it's also really cheap, that's an incredibly powerful moat. And so as I think about speed, I compare that against getting a few extra percentage points on some of these cutting edge benchmarks, AMI 2025. If the difference between the best model and this model is 98 versus 100% on AMI 2025, it doesn't matter, right? I'm at this point where I really believe speed is the most important thing given where the model quality is today. And so what we need to do now is deploy and implement and teach and build out the scaffolding. And that's really where the maximum value is going to come from. And I think a lot of people have said this. I'm going to repeat it again. If the model intelligence froze today, we would still have years of build out ahead of us. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, solidified this week with Flash's release.
Yeah, interesting. So stop model innovation, model development in favor of getting implementation and integration correct.
I wouldn't say stop, uh, but I think just in terms of the economics, in terms of getting the most people to be leveraging artificial intelligence, yeah, just focus on speed for that side of your business. Of course, there was this article, I forget where it was from, but maybe you can pull it up as I'm talking about it. But it basically talked about the research versus product friction inside OpenAI. And I'm sure a lot of companies are facing this. There's limited compute. You can only put it towards so many initiatives. And so there's this, do we want to continue investing all of our compute or a lot of our compute into the research side, pushing the frontier of these models with the potential to have this, massive unlock, although definitely not guaranteed? Or do we serve the demands of users? And I think speed is actually a part of that conversation because typically with speed, it's also a cheaper, more efficient model and thus maybe takes less resources. Of course, Doug coming up next can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. You mentioned use cases and the model quality is at a point where we can have a lot of confidence in the output. Now, what are the exceptions though? Like, I think about the medical field, the legal field, even financial fields. Would you draw the line there, or do you think the model quality is good enough to really focus on the implementation still?
I think that's an excellent point. It really depends on the use case. I certainly have use cases in which I'm using deep research, where I'm maxing out test time compute, where I want the pro version of the model. But I think my point is 99% of my use cases don't need that.
Yeah.
99% of my use cases is stuff that I'm thinking about maybe a Google search for, or AI mode search, or ChatGPT. How do I get the quickest answer? How do I figure out this piece of information? But yeah, there are certainly use cases in which the kind of extended thinking, the largest, best frontier version of a model is incredibly important. Science is one of them. And I think there's now to like the flip side of this argument is if if this is all a race to self-improving artificial intelligence, then certainly companies want to invest heavily into the research side of the organization. The pro versions, the frontierist versions of the model are incredibly
Hmm.
important because it's a winner take all. Whichever company gets there first, basically it's just exponential gains after that, and every other competitor can't catch up. And so, to your point about is it science? Is it? It probably are. Excuse me. It probably is those those areas of the economy that do need the extra compute.
Yeah. And knowing like each one of these frontier labs has kind of a different personality, a different culture. I wonder if each lab kind of takes a different perspective on this. So maybe OpenAI, as an example, is racing towards that recurring learning, whereas maybe a company like Anthropic or Google is more focused on the implementation, the practicality of these models.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversation this week has been about enterprise versus consumer, and obviously, OpenAI is really going after both, right? I
Yeah.
think perceptually, they're known for consumer more, but they're certainly going after both. Anthropic is completely focused on enterprise, and I also think that informs the strategy as well. Um, I do think even within enterprise, speed is probably the thing that matters most. A lot of these companies, which I don't think people realize, when a new model drops, a new frontier model, the big companies are not just like, okay, let's swap out the existing model and put in the new one immediately. It's not like that. There's a lot of change management that needs to happen. A lot of them just don't even want to undertake the effort to put in a new model because it's not as simple as just replacing a key, for example. So
Right.
it's so interesting to think about the tension between research and product, the tension between frontier and speed. Then we have, the economics around the cost of the model versus the speed versus the quality. Then where do we put our compute resources? It's so interesting. We're watching the different strategies play out in real time.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be good to get Logan's perspective on this. We have a lot of guests actually that we can talk through this question about. You know, I really want to talk about a couple other things. Bernie Sanders coming out with this call for a moratorium. I want to talk about this ASML situation. I think they're calling it the Manhattan Project. Reuters just reported on this. But you know what? I feel like Doug would be a great person to talk
Yeah,
with
let's bring them
about
on.
these things. Let's bring him on. So, up first guest, we have the president of SemiAnalysis, one of our favorite research and consulting firms who specializes in semiconductors and artificial intelligence. Doug, welcome to the show. I believe you are muted.
Hello, thank you for having me. Can you hear me now?
There we
Yes,
go.
sir.
Yes, we
What's up,
There
can.
you
Doug?
go. Okay. Hey, nice to meet you guys. Thanks for having me on the show. Let's chat. Those are both areas of my expertise. And I was listening in on your previous conversation. I actually have a lot of thoughts on, let's say, speed. If we're talking about, are you talking about like in deployment or rather just like token throughput? Would love to have a
Token.
conversation.
Let's do it.
Uh,
Token throughput. I am talking about inference speed, time to first token. I, as a consumer or enterprise, I'm putting in my prompt. How quickly am I getting the first token? How quickly am I getting the full response?
So I actually, so look, I think what's really interesting is some of the problems that you're describing is actually you have it in inverse, right? Google has this really quick time to first token. Well, it's actually because they have a ginormous infrastructure stack and they have much less users. You can argue the inverse of the problem is that ChatGPT has so many users, and so what, you're talking about like, oh, why is it so slow? Well, there's many ways to essentially increase total throughput of tokens at the aggregate level, but what that does is you have to batch tokens together. And so you can serve more users concurrently, but it's a function of like how do you choose to offer supply. And so Claude is a good example where it's very clear that they're pulling back some of this in order to offer the best or to be able to even offer all intelligence to all their users, they have to have much slower tokens. So sometimes you see the speed of the token. It's actually kind of seeing how do you serve a ton more users with the same infrastructure. That's the easiest way to solve it.
So when you see a model like Flash released or a mini or micro from other companies, I mean, there's a lot of optimization that goes into those models to get them to be very fast. And so is that less important than the architecture you're working with and or the number of users that you have served by that architecture?
I think making it a single attribute is pretty much is the wrong way to think about it. What we found a lot here at SemiAnalysis is like there's a lot of these secret axes of how a user enjoys or uses let's say a intelligence model, right? Pretty much in a perfect world, I could if you had one NVIDIA GB200 inferencing for just a single user, you could get like 10,000 users per or 10,000 tokens per user or something like that. We actually do quite a bit of work, and if you can pull up inferencemax.ai, that's actually the example of what we're kind of showing here. Total throughput per GPU, right? Pretty much you can see the throughput interactivity drops as you have more users. And so the more users per GPU, obviously TPU isn't here, essentially the slower the tokens and the inverse. But the problem is if you make it really, inferencemax.ai, if you make it really slow, what will happen is your users will leave. And so you can kind of get users to decide to www. It might be inferencemax.semianalysis.com. I know there's a reroute there as well. But pretty much there's maybe just search inference max on the website. Anyways,
We'll find it.
There's essentially this ginormous trade-off here. And so it's like, okay, in a perfect world, you'd be able to serve like, perfect profit maximizing world. You would give each user extremely slow tokens and they would just wait for you. The reality is you lose users, right? That's the most profitable you can do. So you have to choose your profit level. If you scroll down to token throughput per GPU versus interactivity, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And so the more users you have, scroll one more to interact. The more users, the slower the token throughput per GPU.
And so Doug, okay, let's come back to this for a second. But in a vacuum, when you're thinking about as an end user consuming tokens, how important is speed versus quality? And I think that's really the decision these companies are also dealing with this calculus.
Yeah, I definitely think that's why I'm saying there's multiple axes, right? There's another axis, right? Because in theory, we could all just be doing GPT, OSS, or Llama 3. But I don't like to use Llama 3. I like to use, like right now, my daily driver is Claude 4.5 Opus, even if it's slow. So you want to have a certain level of quality at a certain level of speed, and and then also on the other side for the company, how many tokens at what speed is kind of their decision. So there's this supply demand curve. It's kind of complicated how it all interacts, but in a perfect world, you have the single best model at the fastest speed possible, but that's just extremely unprofitable. So that's the, I guess, the trade-offs at a high level.
Interesting. All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit here. I want to talk about Bernie Sanders. I'm sure you have a take on this. He's called for a national moratorium. I think this happened earlier this week on Wednesday or something. Now, there are a couple of arguments for this that I can understand, but there are many arguments against it. Where do you line up?
So I don't have a strong personal view, let's say, in this. I try to be pretty neutral in all things politics, but let me just say on Bernie Sanders, I think it's not a surprise because there's a popular, maybe left-leaning view that AI is bad and taking over jobs, and I think that's gonna become a ginormous problem going forward. So it makes sense that if you are looking into the midterms and you want to find strong ideas that are resonating with potential voters, you have to find, you got to look for stuff. So I think that, and what's really funny actually is there was an internal, I want to say Elon was actually saying, actually, we should pause all AI stuff like maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a hilarious mirror there. But yeah,
I think at the time it was because especially
OpenAI.
Elon, wanted to catch up, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I think unfortunately, it's kind of like Pandora's box. I'm sure there were global pause demands for nuclear proliferation. And obviously it did actually happen at a government level eventually. But unfortunately, I think that China and the United States are in a race, and it's very hard. There's kind of this prisoner's dilemma of defecting that makes it very hard for everything to come to a grinding halt. So we'll see. I definitely think the current administration is extremely AI friendly, and you see all signs ahead, right? There's definitely a case if the Democrats win the midterms, that it definitely puts some big pauses. But I still think industry, people who pay for stuff, right? Unfortunately, Bernie does have donors that are not just individuals, and in the entire Democratic Party, there's gonna have to be some amount of industry that will be part of it. And it seems very, from the big picture capitalism, there definitely is a desire for figuring out this new technology.
And Doug, as somebody who's an expert at AI infrastructure, semiconductors, look, maybe game it out for us for a minute or two. What happens if we did pause? If we did pause AI infrastructure build out for 6 months, 12 months, what actually happens to the United States, our competitiveness? Game it out for us a little bit.
Um, I think. Okay, so probably in the beginning, if we just, it's like, let's just say we deliver all the things that happen, the economy might slow down a little bit. That's definitely one aspect that I think will be underappreciated. On the other side, I think there's going to be, this might be the example where all model progress stops, and then essentially all we're doing is we're fighting for tokens. Probably all of our throughput goes down quite meaningfully. I think it's one of those things where all of a sudden we become even more supply constrained, and then might get upset or ask for more. That's my first level thought, but it's a very complicated gaming scenario that I can't really think out. A lot of different ways this could go.
Hypothetically, if there was a halt, don't you imagine that these firms would just push offshore? Like, yeah, there would be this momentary blip where construction stops, stops, but just moving to countries that are more friendly.
Yeah, you'd see a lot in Mexico, you'd see a lot in Latin America, you'd see a lot in Canada. Europe is actually starting to get into the game a little bit.
Yeah.
You see a lot in the Middle East, and you'll definitely see a lot in Asia. So I think it would, maybe that's the most simplistic way, is it would almost instantly make the entire game much more international.
Yeah, especially obviously China, right? China is not slowing down anytime soon. So they would just, I mean, realistically pull ahead.
All right.
Let's
Now, really excited about this one. A little surprised. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised about this, but Reuters broke this story that essentially a Chinese lab has been able to produce a lithography machine. Are you read up on this? How real are
Yes,
these
I am.
reports?
So my impression, and actually maybe I will open it with you so I can read it along to see what has been said. But this Manhattan Project thing is for real. I've heard that effectively it's unlimited resources. Some aspect of this is that they are building they're building a prototype with some of the very OG, like
the scraps.
The scraps of the first EUV machines, and I think that they were mostly just doing. So my understanding is it's like a Nikon stage, yeah. So there are it's like a zombie machine. It's like truly Frankenstein being and the Frankenstein pieces are like what you can get from the OG EUV machines. And so I think, look, if they can copy and get something to do an EUV pass, then I think it's not over, but like they'll figure it out.
and
I'm heard there's, uncapped salaries, right? You're seeing uncapped salaries, unlimited research, unlimited, like essentially research grants. Yeah, oh yeah, Jeff is quoted in this one, but yeah, we've caught wind of this, and we think it's going to be real historically. And you can see an example that's already happening today is on the low end of Chinese PVD, where Applied Materials competes with Chinese companies. There is an aspect here where they're starting to win share, and Chinese tools in semicap is already becoming good enough. And there's been many, many, many other places in technology where China has gotten just as good as the West. And this is an example where they're going full sprint ahead to get it. There's a Manhattan project allegedly on this, and they've acquired some of the first samples. So I think it is a matter of when, not if. Betting against China's continue technological progress is betting against it's probably a bad idea. That's my short and steady.
So this in parallel with a lot of reports in the last week or two, which I'm sure you've seen that they've been smuggling in kind of frontier NVIDIA chips to train models. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
I think on the frontier video chips, there's an example where you have this stated versus revealed preference. Definitely, China has been saying, "Oh yeah, it's banned. We don't want any of these Blackwell chips. We could care less." Right, but and then the H20 ban, for example, the unbanned China government said, "Oh, we wouldn't buy them from the West anyways." The reality is, China is constantly essentially saying one thing and then doing the other thing. And I think the example of them doing another thing is continuing to buy chips from the West. And so, yeah, it's not surprising that DeepSeek is smuggling chips to train or and inference models. We have the
And
best
so,
technology.
and so if you think back a little under a year from now during the DeepSeek moment, the whole thing was no, we didn't use the cutting edge NVIDIA chips as DeepSeek to train our model. But a lot of people doubted that at the time. I think even Elon Musk posted about it. So is this kind of more confirmation that no, maybe that didn't actually happen? They're not using Huawei chips. They're not using some other chip. They just smuggled it in and they're doing their thing.
There's a mix in the same way that the leading labs in the United States, let's say OpenAI is using TPUs, allegedly Trainiums now, and also GPUs. I would guess that DeepSeek is using Huawei, but also H20s, but also A100s, but also H100s, and also H200s, and if they can, but Blackwell chips as well. The reality is everyone who is servicing a lot of users or trying to do frontier research is compute constrained. And so if you're compute constrained, what you have to do is you have to find as many different diversifying sources of compute available to you. And if I was DeepSeek or another Chinese lab, I would be pursuing all options at once.
Do you think it's good for us to be selling NVIDIA chips into China? Do you think it's good for them to build a portion of their infrastructure on top of American AI architecture?
So this is okay. So the stance you just stated is very in line with the historical NVIDIA stance, is that global AI infrastructure stack should be American. So it's complicated because the global semiconductor production stack was American, and yet we imported, or rather, sorry, we exported machines into China. And as we continue to export machines into China, what we've seen is some version of them have been copied, and now that market is probably never going to be available to American companies again. So it's kind of this insidious problem where, yes, to a certain extent, it is good because we probably want the entire world to be addicted to American technology. But on the other side, it is also bad because that is a belief and faith that the ecosystem will not try to adapt, steal, and modify and copy what we have. And when it's been very clear that that's the rule of law in China. And so if we sell into China and they are going to quickly copy, adapt, and steal, um, and it kind of is like giving them an advantage. Now, the inverse of that is, well, if you sell into China, then it gives them the leading American companies more resources to continue to compete. So that's kind of the calculus on all the ends. It's complicated, it's nuanced. I am not exactly certain which way is the right way. I just have been a little bit scarred by, let's say, the semi-cap export into China and watching them effectively figure it out. I think now on the different side, though, is they can't make the chips themselves, but they can figure out a lot of things to get around some of these constraints. Now, I think the thing is, like, even though Huawei's doing a great job and they're definitely really, really, really impressive engineering team, I think it's a lot more complicated than you think. There is there is so many, like, for example, Huawei has this like optic scale out thing, but essentially the universal feedback is it's extremely unstable. The GB200, which is made with the best technology in the entire world and has a global infrastructure to support it, is also really unstable. And so it's kind of this weird process where I think everyone is trying to get to the best outcome. And if you enable them or you let them get opportunities to like I think of it as like giving them the answers to the homework. It's homework, right? They're gonna have to figure out themselves, and if you give them the answers, they will understand and learn it much quicker. And I think that that's the problem. Like there is a delicate balance, and like the regimes matter. I'm not going to be the one to tell you what's the right answer. Are you hawkish or are you dovish? Do you believe in coupling, or should we go back? Should we go back to more globalization? Should we do less? Then there are many different ways that we can go. But I think right now the vibe, for lack of a better word, or rather maybe the zeitgeist for the best word, the
Doug,
zeitgeist right now is a continued decoupling.
yeah, and just to interrupt for a second, you said the GB200 is unstable. You said something China was doing. Can you just define what you mean by unstable?
So okay, unstable because the GB200 is 72 GPUs, and it's like, you do Jensen math, and they're all connected via these cables. There's like 1,000 links, okay? Because it's an all-to-all backplane. That backplane, if you think about it, if one of those links fail, the entire thing goes down. So that's 1,000 points of failure. They're all pushed to the exact limit of what you can do with signal integrity over copper at that distance. And signals are very finicky. So there's a lot of crosstalk. The backplane has been very unstable, but just like every new technology, right? The first generation has issues, but as you continue to go down time, the entire ecosystem figures out, hey, how do we stabilize these issues? How do we solve these problems?
Yeah.
Now, China is pursuing the same, like, think about it this way. China looks at NVIDIA saying, hey, here's the GB200, scale up world size with copper, right? And then we look on the other side. So what they're like, why don't we do this with optics, which is where China has a huge advantage in. And they're doing it as well, but it's the same. But in order to scale up with the worst chip, you have to have a much bigger scale up area. So they have a lot more cables. The Cloud Matrix 384 is effectively their version of the GB200. And so it has a lot more power. It has a little bit worse performance, and it has way more links. So that instability in terms of each one of those links, meaning a connection between one and another, right? If you have, let's say, like 3,000 links between all the chips, and one of those links fail, your 384 chips are not working. So that's been kind of the engineering technical challenge. And so the problem is if we sell GB200s into China, they're going to figure out how to make a lot more stable copper connectivity, which is an order of magnitude more energy efficient. But at the same time, we're talking about energy efficiency. China is filled with energy. They have nuclear power plants out the wazoo, at least compared to the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Doug,
I like Jensen math. We need more Jensen math. But so Doug, I want to go back just for a moment on this Manhattan project reproducing lithography machines. My question here is, why is it that the US doesn't seem to have the same motivation to create lithography on their own? Is it just because they have a close relationship with ASML and they don't need to worry about it? We talked to Jeff on your team about substrate. That seems to be, so there does seem to be some initiatives underway, but there's not the strength and resources of the US government necessarily behind it.
Yeah, well, the very open secret is that one of the reasons why we were able to get a Dutch company to stop selling stuff into China is because guess where all the light sources are from? They're from a San Diego company called Cymer. Okay, so one of the most important components in the United States, or of the entire EUV machine, is made in America, or at least most of the foundational IP was created here. And so when we talk about the EUV portion, what's so hard about making all this? I think, and I'm not going to do like the full overview of the EUV machine, but there's obviously the light source, and then getting it stable, then pushing it out and making it stable after you have the tin plasma stuff. Making the stable without contamination is like one of the hardest problems, and that whole problem chain, it was partially done with an American company. Now the stage, which is like the fast moving part that patterns the wafers, honestly, maybe you can make it go slower, maybe the throughput isn't as high, but that's probably a solved problem. The Nikon and Canon portions of it, those are other UV or DUV machines. So there's ways, and then all the mirrors and stuff like that is probably going to be very hard as well. So if you're asking why the United States doesn't care, it's because a lot of the IP was made here anyways.
okay. Doug, I want to go back to NVIDIA for a minute. It seems like we're at this moment in time in which NVIDIA actually has some legitimate competition on the compute side. So we have TPUs, we have the Trainium set of chips, we have potentially quantum. Can you talk about this moment in time and the competition that NVIDIA might be feeling or might not be feeling?
So I definitely think NVIDIA is feeling competition, right? This is the first time, specifically from the TPU v7. The TPU v7, as we wrote in our article, is a system scale up product. Okay. The same thing, we talked about I talked about the GB200 and having those copper links, scaling up the world size of memory, so it can serve and train bigger and bigger models, right? How they solve it is okay, I'm trying to think of the best analogy here. So let's just say, okay, if you make a bigger and bigger sandwich or something like that, pretty much NVIDIA makes the biggest possible sandwich with the fattest possible bread before it's like not even considered a sandwich and it falls apart. Okay, what let's say TPU is doing is they're making sliders. They have sliders and they have this giant pyramid of sliders versus making these big sandwiches and these giant pyramid of sandwiches. They're approaching the same problem, but at different scale, like different cutoffs and different kind of technology choices. Remember, choosing and pushing this technology forward, there's many different edges of how you can do it. And so on the TPU side, the 3D torus is what it's called, where it has 9,000 chips connected to each other. So think of 9,000 little sliders connected to each other in this big scale up world. And so that is a systems level approach that doesn't need to push as hard in terms of the chip level manufacturing, in terms of the rack scale, like the density, the power. It is liquid cooled, and they were one of the first people to do it. But you don't have to push as aggressively on specs because you don't have to make these burgers that great. They're not going to fall apart. They're very small. And you just stack a lot of them. Okay, and so that's kind of the thought process here. And they've been pursuing this path for a long time. And I think finally they've gotten to the point with their OCS, the optical circuit switching, and also just their copper/optics mixing as a prowess to make this really compelling alternative for the first time. And so that's the big deal. And we think they're doing a really good job. So, in our article, behind the paywall, made some people definitely upset is that Rubin, which is NVIDIA's next chip, is going to do a lot better than TPU. One of the reasons why actually is because there was this opportunity for NVIDIA to, when they were taping out the chip, to make it more aggressive or less aggressive. And they saw TPU v7 and they're like, no. Actually, competition is here. Let's put our pedal to the metal, right? We're going to keep pushing the technology roadmap. So NVIDIA is definitely feeling the first competition it's had in the game for quite some time. Now, Google's always been a good competitor because they not only do they have the chips, they have the entire vertically integrated stack, which creates a total cost of ownership. By vertically integrating, you can stack margin and then therefore have a lower cost to the end user, and you can have a lot of it. So yeah, NVIDIA sees competition, but I guess the other part of this is that TPUs are now being sold externally, and that's kind of cracking that open as well, because NVIDIA's biggest opportunity and differentiator was it was the only chip that you could buy if you were at any company not named Google. Right. So if you're OpenAI and you're trying to make the best AI possible, there's only one game in town. It was NVIDIA. Maybe you could say it's AMD, but it's not as good, blah, 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 whatever. And so now with this TPU opening of the ecosystem, we think it's a big opportunity for Google to continue to crush it. And then also it's NVIDIA's competitive response that has to rise to it. And we think they're going to do a good job. They are the largest company in the world for a reason,
And Doug, I want to get your final thoughts on quantum as it relates to competition to NVIDIA. Are we anywhere close to actually seeing production grade quantum competing with TPUs, Trainium, NVIDIA chips?
No, we're not even anywhere close. Sorry, guys. I know people get really excited, but it's 5+ years away. I mean, that's just what it comes down to. Honestly, Martin Shkreli on Twitter has done a really good job of explaining why. He's like, hey, just show me. Show me one time it's faster. And it's like, some of these really basic math problems are not able to be solved faster. Now, there are definitely opportunities. Like, it's going to happen. But I think the correct framing of quantum is you should almost think of it like It's like the original HPC programs all over again. HPC being high performance computing, the Aurora labs, like the big, large labs that were doing system level modeling for, like, let's say, weather, right? It's very, very specifically tailored to solve one hard, big problem. And the hard, big problems that quantum is best at is like to the end problems, right? I think it's like NP problem, NP hard. Um, and there's a whole class of science that would be instantly unlocked if we had this computational available to us. And I think for the most part, the way that current production grade level inference and training is done, I don't really see the stability and need, the stability of these computational style be able to compete anytime soon. GB200 is using all the best super battle hardened technology, and a lot of people are like, oh, we've been able to stabilize these qubits for like 45 minutes, right? It's just not ready. But even with, let's say we can get it to a little bit longer, there's this huge wide open field where there's no traction, or not no traction, slow traction. And if we were able to make quantum computing, we would completely unlock chemicals, materials, probably genomics. There's a lot of areas where this would blow up, and it would be awesome because that would recursively be able to improve the entire ecosystem.
All right, Doug, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Doug, you can find him SemiAnalysis _ on Twitter and semianalysis.com. Doug, come back again, please. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Have a great day, guys.
See you,
All
Doug.
right. Awesome. Yeah, it's crazy how deeply technical and obviously such a deep understanding of the semiconductor industry that entire team has. We've spoken to Dylan Patel. We've now spoken with Doug. We spoke with Jeff. They're all just like whip smart and an absolute pleasure to speak with.
Yeah, there was frankly so much more to discuss. You know what company we never talk about on this show?
What's that?
Intel. I really wanted to get his take on Intel. I
Yeah,
feel like
we'll have to ask him next time.
it's a next time thing.
Let's
All
bring
right,
on our next guest.
With that, let's bring on guest number 2. So, our next guest earned his PhD from NYU under none other than Jan LeCun, and joined Deepmind at the very beginning, back in 2012, as a research scientist. And he is now the CTO of Deepmind and chief AI architect at Google. Koray, welcome to the show.
Hello, hi. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course. How are you today?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. I'm fine. Thank you very much. You're well too?
Things are good. Things are good. We're getting ready for the holidays,
Yeah,
exactly. Little break. It'll be nice. Are you taking some time off?
Yes, yeah, hopefully I will too. Yeah, spend some time with family. I think everyone is tired. The field is very fast.
It's been a big year over there.
Yeah, you guys have been shipping like crazy.
Yeah, we try to. Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole field is progressing really, really fast over this year, and I think I'm quite happy with how much we have managed to maintain the pace. Like we have managed to do good progress, and I think like the shipping aspect is really, really important. I think we have been now we are in a better place in terms of doing the research, but also doing it together with the products, doing the model development integrated with the products, and that brings in the shipping aspect. I think that's nice. Of course, like once you ship, like the second stage starts, right? Like you start getting all this feedback from the users, and that's what's important.
So is the pace a strategic decision? We need to ship fast so we can learn fast, other things, or is it a side effect of just how the team is organized, the pace of AI in general? Walk us through that.
It's a little bit of strategic. I mean, you have to organize for it, but like I'd like to believe that, I mean, obviously, if you can iterate fast, then you'll progress faster, but every iteration has to be meaningful, right? Like, I mean, if you spend time iterating and pushing things out that are not necessarily meaningfully different, then we will end up with actually slowing down ourselves. So like, yes, the idea is to be able to iterate fast and ship more with the products, work a lot more with the products, be in synchronization with them. But also at the same time, we have to put the organization in so that at different times, we have a lot of new ideas and research coming in, and to be able to package them in that fast-paced environment, like that happens together. We have something like every 4 to 6 weeks, we do an update to our models when you look at the last like year and a half. And I think like we have been getting better at how do we prepare our research, because it's like channel, right? Like you can imagine that as like a train going through, and then a lot of research that happens. It's not like you're going to do research for a month, right? Like a lot of research happens, and then how do you make sure that there are ideas and explorations that are happening on different time horizons that are packaged for going into different revisions, and then they are of course coherent. Of course, at the same time, you have to fix stuff too, right? Like, I mean, we release a model and then we understand, okay, this part was not good, or we realize something is important in the field. We just need to bake that in.
Yeah, and Koray, there's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of weeks about the tension between research and product sides of different frontier labs. How does Google think about it? Is part of your role deciding where to invest the compute? Do you have those difficult decisions to make? And yeah, just generally, how do you think about the trade-off, if there is trade-off between product and research?
Like, the way I think about it is like it's not necessarily a trade-off. It's actually a strategic decision. Like at Google DeepMind, the goal has always been build AGI. With Gemini, that's what we are trying to do, right? Like that's our goal, that's our mission, that's what we are working towards. But I don't believe that you can work towards that in a sort of like a closed environment, in a black box environment, do the research. I really believe that to be able to go towards AGI, the path, we need to light that path. And we are lighting that path through the products. We need to understand how users are using the models, what are the challenging use cases. That's how you understand, okay, in these areas, the model is good. In those areas, the model is not good. And those problems are actually quite important for us to understand. So we do this hand in hand. Of course, there is a strategic decision making in terms of which products we work with and what are the challenges that we emphasize more. But that's the advantage of, in a way, being in Google. There are so many interesting products with so many users. I think it gives us a lot of feedback and it challenges us a lot. Like in terms of pushing the model frontier, the boundary, of course, like we get a lot of challenge from there. We need to fuse that with our ideas about what is the frontier, where the technology should go, right? Like, of course, as researchers, we have those ideas about where the technology should go, but you need to fuse that, melt that with what you see from the product. So that two-way communication is important. And look, I mean, of course, like, I mean, in the context of doing that, like all sorts of resources are critical, compute is critical, and we make these decisions just like I think any company does. You have to have a good governance system.
So that feedback loop makes a lot of sense. Are there certain products that you look to with more reliable signal or stronger signal than other products?
The two main products that we work very closely with are the Gemini app, of course. And there, I think we get a lot of information from like the general use cases, and you get a lot of breadth, right? Like because people are using these models to do all sorts of things in their lives. And understanding that is actually quite important. We can figure out like, okay, physics, math, how we are going to push those frontiers, coding, agents. But like how people use Gemini app in their daily lives, that gives us a lot of feedback. The other one is AI mode. AI mode is like where search is, right? So like we get a lot of informational queries there, and that teaches us a lot in terms of what are people trying to learn about. And being able to understand that and have a model that can respond to those kinds of queries that people go to search, but a lot more deeper, right? Like you're trying to learn about something, you are investigating or you're researching something, and that teaches us a lot. I'm quite fan of working through our cloud team with our enterprise partners, developers and enterprises. I think that is very important because there people are trying to solve real problems, right? Like your day-to-day work, and there's a spectrum, of course, in terms of the reasoning capabilities that is required or the generality that is required. And like those being real use cases for like real work that people are doing in their daily work, that gives us huge amount of signal. So across these three, I think we get a lot of signal that I'm I'm very happy that we have established a way of working with all three categories.
Koray, you mentioned the mission of DeepMind is to achieve AGI. Maybe just go back and what is your personal definition or what is DeepMind's definition of AGI?
Yeah. I think that the most important thing there is generality, right? Like when we think about, I think AI has been around for like as a term, a lot of people have been working on it for both from the aspect of like research. Of course, there's a long history of research in AI, and there's a long history of its practical applications in commercial world as well, right? I think the most important thing that is differentiating what we do right now is that generality, right? Like we are not trying to solve any particular problem. We are not trying to create systems for solving a particular domain. And that generality is key. And that generality also applies to our model development perspective as well. When you look at Gemini, like we are not trying to create one model for, let's say, coding, one model for chat, or one model for any other domain, right? Like finance, law, like that could be an approach. But at the same time, I think what we are trying to do is learn from all of them at the same time and create a general model that can progress the understanding, that can progress the generality across all those. And then when we reach a level where these models are actually like very strong companions for you when you are doing really reasoning heavy tasks, I think that is when we feel like, okay, we are approaching our goals.
Do you think we can reach AGI based on the current architecture? Do you think it's a function of just continuing to scale up what we already have, or do you think we need new innovations, new research?
Yeah. Like from my point of view, like the main thing has always been and will always be about research and innovation, right? And we are still at that stage. Scaling laws like tell you that like there is a chance that you will be able to get to a certain scale, you will need certain amount of data, certain amount of compute. But it doesn't mean that it's a given. There's a lot of research that needs to be done to be able to actually get to those performance levels. Everything that we have done in the last 3-4 years, everything that a lot of the folks, a lot of research labs that they have done across the field is about doing that research. But what we understand is there are some fundamental principles of how computation is related to intelligence in a way, and how data is related to intelligence. And knowing those relationships is very useful. It guides you towards how you can do your research, but it is the research and innovation at the end that makes you progress on that curve.
On the research and innovation side, I immediately think of the efforts around science that DeepMind has.
Mhm.
And this seems to be something that is a little unique to DeepMind. There is such a strong focus on the sciences, whether it's AlphaFold or nuclear fusion, discovering new materials. Like this is something that is constantly being researched and released to the public. Why is that? Like, why is there such ambition and focus there?
I think it's been from the first day, and like Demis especially and Shane as founders have like put a lot of emphasis from the early days on that. And like I think it is like again there are two reasons for it. One, like sciences, of course, like we come from like we are all scientists ourselves, like engineers and scientists, and we believe that if you can solve those root node problems, then you will actually unlock a lot more progress across many domains, right? Like that's the good thing about being able to solve really fundamental scientific problems. And when we look at the technology that we are developing, it's a fundamental technology. We believe that it's going to change the way we do things, not just in our daily lives, but also, of course, like how we learn and how we do science as well. So from the first day, it has always been a goal to be able to use our technology to understand, okay, can we do science in a different way? And DeepMind has always had this focus of being like trying to push that frontier. And like AlphaFold was a big example. I think like Demis was very excited and motivated about that from the early days. And I think it has taught us a lot too, right? Like all these things that we have done in sciences, they are particular problems that are suitable in a way at the time where the technology was to be able to be changed in a way how we approach those problems with AI. And we learn from those because hard problems, either in sciences or in real world, right? Hard problems push the frontier of the technology that you are trying to develop using that problem, right? And that's the main aspect. Like we do those, like we learn a lot in terms of pushing our frontier in AI, but also at the same time, we are hopefully unlocking really critical technologies that make a huge amount of positive impact in all sorts of fields, and then with that downstream impact.
And Koray, as you think about AGI, as you think about investing into using artificial intelligence to progress science, is all of this really a race towards self-improving AI? Is that part of the AGI calculus that you're doing at Google?
I think like that's part of it. Let me put it this way, right? Like a lot of the development that we are doing, as I said, is the development of AGI is hand in hand with the products that we are developing, right? The critical part about that is through the products you have connection to the users. Once you have connection to the users, you understand the real problems. Also, at the same time, you are developing something that is continuously being stress tested in the real world in terms of its safety, in terms of its security, right? So that development cycle that integrates the safety and security aspect in that iterative manner, I think is the right way to develop. The self-improving AI aspect, it is one of the things, of course, like as a research direction, that's definitely there, because if you have an intelligent algorithm, especially one that can reason more, that can think more, right? We are already using these methods and algorithms across the field, right? Like we all talk about how we can use these models in our own work. We're already using these algorithms to help us be more productive, to help us think through problems more. And I think there's an element of course, like can we actually reach an algorithm that can also continue to do this by itself, so that like it can help us progress even faster, right? And explore problems or explore solutions faster and better. But it's not necessarily the only goal or the single goal. The main goal is to be able to build a technology that is really broad and general and applicable in real world, and make that impact in real world through users.
As you're working on these incredible challenges, it's not far to say that it's not too far to say that this is the most important technology that humanity has ever been working on. Like, how does that feel? I'm so curious to understand your perspective on the weight of that.
Me too.
Look, I mean, thank you very much. I feel like it is like personally, I feel lucky, right? And I think there are a lot of things that come together to be able to create this moment, right? It's not just like the AI algorithms that we are working with is the thing. Like the hardware has to reach a certain point. Our understanding of how to use that hardware has to reach a certain point. Data, like and availability of data has to reach a certain point. All these come together with all the years and years and decades of research on AI, right? Like all that coming together is creating this moment. I feel lucky that like me personally and as a field, we are researchers who are interested in this field, but at the same time, we are at the moment where the conditions are right. That's how we are feeling, right? Like I think a lot of people who worked on AI many, many years ago also felt like they are working on probably the most fundamental technology that can be developed, but like the conditions were not necessarily there. And now we have everything that we have in front of us. And I think like that responsibility, it gives you some sort of perspective on responsibility, opportunity. So like I feel lucky to be able to be in this point, and I think we have to approach it with that humbleness, but also ambition, right? Like because it's a big opportunity for all of us and for everyone. If we can build a technology that will make that big positive impact.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who are kind of very nervous. I don't know if you saw Bernie Sanders said we should stop building out AI data centers. Maybe do you have any words of confidence for the folks who aren't necessarily kind of on the inside of the AI industry that might be scared about either automating their job away or maybe more even existential threats of artificial intelligence?
Look, I think like
Why
one
should
of
people be
the
excited?
right. So one of the reasons I think like a lot of people around the world, both researchers and users, are excited about AI is that we see its impact in our daily lives, right? Like we see the positive impact. We see how it can increase productivity. We see how it can actually help us learn about new things, how it can actually help you in areas that you're not the expert to actually guide you through hard problems, right? And I think like by the virtue that right now it is a lot more integrated with products and users, us for specifically, it's really important that we develop this through this very trusted, tested setup, right? We have products, we take a very engineering mindset through developing those products, right? Like we test them well, we test them with the users. That is partly to understand, of course, like where should we improve, but also partly to understand what are the areas that are not working well. So I think like believing in this, like years and years of trusted, tested technological development that we have done in many different fields is one of the things that brings us to a point that we are developing these technologies not completely in black boxes and then we are going to think about safety later. We are thinking about the safety and the security and applications of these technologies while we are developing them. Now, at the same time, it doesn't mean that these are like completely safe and like there are no issues. I completely understand there's a lot of impact on a lot of people's lives and a lot of like anxiety around like how it could impact. But I think the opportunity and the opportunities that are provided to people in terms of enhancing the lives and increasing people's productivity, getting them to learn about something new, I think these are going to open up a lot more opportunities and progress directions for like I think for the whole field and for people as well. But it needs to go hand in hand, right? Like, I mean, like we are doing the development, we need to take a really responsible stand there, be careful, but also at the same time, we have to do it together with like getting a lot of feedback rather than trying to keep it in a closed box, together with external parties, getting that feedback from users, from other researchers, from safety experts, fuse that all in so that we can provide the best technology that we can give to the world.
Well, Matt and I are both highly optimistic while noting that there are, of course, risks. You know, I'm curious as you talk about getting feedback and experimentation and doing the research, the testing necessary to make sure that these models and these advancements are safe. There is inherent tension, right, between that and pushing the frontier forward. So what are like the practical steps that a lab like Deepmind takes when testing these models for potential risks? What does that look like just at a high level?
Yeah, I think like there are different stages. One is like we have our safety teams and security teams, right? A big part of what they do is they are actually part of our model development teams. So when you think about when we are developing the models, I think it's a very fair question. Everyone thinks that, oh, we are only thinking about pushing the benchmarks and the quality forward. And then we are going to think about safety. But actually, it goes hand in hand, right? Like whenever we are looking at the model in terms of quality, a big part of it is also looking at the safety and security of the models as well. At the same time, we are looking at the quality of the models. We will look at, and we do look at the safety metrics, the security, and its risk, and its applications as well. And our researchers there that are working on safety and security, they are part of our teams that are doing the model development. So like we talked about the revisions that we do every 4 to 6 weeks, right? Like that, like we come together and try to push the frontier. Our safety and security experts are also there. They're trying to push the frontier on safety and security of the models as well. And this is part of the iterative process that I think like you have to build something to be safe from the beginning. You have to design it to be safe from the beginning. Right? You're not going to build it and then try to make sure that it is safe. And that's the approach that we are trying to take. That's step one. But then, of course, what happens is we also have this frontier safety framework that just like other labs do. And there we also test like sort of extreme capabilities of the models. Like can it have dangerous capabilities in terms of, let's say, cyber attacks, right? And like there's a community of folks who are working on how can we test that and what are the kinds of progress and developments that the models have through those. And by using those, we try to understand like what are the areas that we need to make sure that the models, that development process is better suited to push something to the outside world. So there are these layers of safety and security thinking that is going on. This is part of, as I said, and this whole process has evolved, right? Like this is why it is important to not just release the model with that last safety layer at the end, but also when you think about the development of a model, but the whole research process over the years that got us here, by getting that external feedback, listening to people who are seeing the problems or who have concerns, we develop these processes, right? Like both during the development of the model, but then also testing in different ways. We also work with a lot of governments as well in terms of like do testing. And also it is just like our research evolves, this is going to evolve too, right? Like as our understanding of the models evolve, we are going to understand and we are going to learn more about how to do better safety testing and evaluations too.
All right, Koray, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Congratulations on Flash. Congratulations on everything you're doing at Deepmind. Go follow him on X, Koray KV on X, and of course, go check out Gemini. Go check out AI Mode and google.com.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Koray.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays. Yeah.
All right. I think we should just go straight to our next guest.
Just keep it going. Why not?
Keep the Google
train
going.
All right. Well, up next, we have good friend of the show, Logan Kilpatrick, podcaster extraordinaire, product lead at Google DeepMind. Logan, welcome back to Forward Future Live.
How's it going, guys? Nice to see you. I'm happy to be back. I feel like this has got to be the fastest return guest showing in human history. I feel like I just saw you both, and it's a tough act to follow with Koray. So hopefully I'll try to say something interesting.
Yeah. Well, first, let's just get into it. Congratulations on Flash, right? I'm so excited to talk to you about this because I think it solidified a lot of what I had been thinking. Maybe I'll use the word vindicated a little bit. I've been a speed maxi for a while, and it just seems like there's really something special on a lot of different dimensions. And I want to first just get your thoughts on, like, you had Gemini 3, and then just a few weeks later, Flash. Like, what did it like? What's tell me a little bit about the strategy behind Flash and how it affects. Is it your workhorse? Is basically what I'm asking.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think, it is. There's also another interesting thread to this, which is, and we were having a brief version of this conversation earlier this week in the MK in the office. I think Flash like historically meant something in the sort of previous era, and like what it's meant to be a Flash model, I think has actually changed. Like historically, Flash meant like our cheapest, sort of lower intelligent model, and it sort of had a very specific set of characteristics. I think some of those things have lived on, like it's lower cost, for example, and it's, higher rate limits. But I think this Flash model has sort of like pushed this narrative in a really interesting way because it actually is better on some dimensions than the Pro model.
Yeah.
Not all dimensions. And obviously Pro is still an incredibly capable model, but it's fun to see the narrative challenged. And I think this model has like certainly challenged the narrative. And I'll make one quick comment, which is I saw like some of the conversation that I think has been taking place online around Flash is historically folks would look at the most frontier capable model and they would choose that model regardless of the sort of speed and latency conversation. And it was because they sort of wanted to have the best answers to their questions. And I think now, maybe Matt, to your point, like this model is so fast and it's also like really, really smart that I think people have started to move over to Flash as sort of their daily driver model, just in like everyday work that they're doing with AI, because like it can really sort of operate at the speed of your thought and it can sort of keep you in flow state, which I think is a really, really interesting development if you sort of think about how that transpires over the next 2 years of the technology.
Yeah, and it feels like the Flash release is maybe even more consequential than the Gemini 3 release just a few weeks ago. Is that how you personally feel? Is that how Google feels?
You definitely need, so this is actually an interesting question. Historically, we were running this playbook of like most of the Gemini usage actually came from the Flash models, and we didn't, um, we were in certain pockets really competitive at the frontier, but not across the board. Strategically, I think it is like of the utmost importance to have like hands down the most capable frontier model. I think, and the story is like if you don't have the most capable frontier model, like people don't show up. Like they'll go to some other platform and they'll get their smaller model from whatever that other platform is. So you need to be competitive on the frontier of intelligence. It also like directly trickles into the small models. Like the smaller models are distilled off of the bigger models. So if you have a really capable smart model, it sort of unlocks not only from a like a deeply technical perspective, it unlocks a bunch of those things, but also just in how people use the models. Again, if you have a really smart frontier intelligent model and it can help, accelerate researchers or software developers or product managers inside of Google by even 1%, like at the scale of Google, that's a massive amount of impact. So I think you have to win frontier intelligence. It's not an option. It's like it's where the battle's taking place.
It's interesting. I'm kind of surprised to hear that because I've been saying for the vast majority of use cases, I'm sure you're seeing this, the and especially with Gemini 3 Flash, that is more than sufficient, right? And so, but you're saying people are not coming in to try the family of products unless you have the best frontier model. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, there's dimensions to this. I think it depends on like which customer segment you're talking about, which I think is a good example of this. I think it depends on like, I think the narrative shapes a lot of the top of funnel interest. Like if people think that you have the best models, and that's sort of like the place that you have in sort of the conversation, like it's more likely like I, as a customer personally, independent of my job at Google, I want to use the products that have the best models. And so if it's some other product, like I'm potentially going to be inclined to go and try those products as well. Um, that said, like it does, obviously Google has great distribution across a bunch of existing products, and the Flash model matters a lot for that because, we talk about, and I think others like, Robbie Stein on the search side has talked about like the Gemini model is actually the first AI experience that most people have. Like Gemini powers a bunch of the search AI experiences, which now have, many hundreds of millions or billions of users. And that sort of being able to give them a really great experience when they show up is really important. And obviously, like maybe you're not looking for frontier intelligence when you sort of do a Google search necessarily. Though I think there is with AI mode, the cool thing is like you actually can get frontier intelligence in that experience now, which is really, really fun. So you need both. But like I also think the like North Star mission from a GDM perspective, I think is to sort of go and build that frontier intelligence.
So I'm curious about the ripple effects of launching a new model that gets a lot of good PR. It crushes the benchmarks. Like, are you seeing spikes in usage immediately after that? Are you seeing users come in droves? Like, what are the ripple effects of that?
Yeah, lots of ripple effects. I like this idea in my head, and what plays out in practice is like you launch this model, and for many teams at Google, it is like just the start of a lot of work that begins. And especially going into the holidays, it'll be a next fun couple of weeks to pull this off. But yeah, I mean, you have like tons of customers showing up and like trying to get their hands on the model. You're also getting like lots of feedback, like the model iteration cycle. And I don't know how much Koray talked about this, or he alluded to this as I was listening briefly, but like we're doing this iteration process with our customers. So like we need that signal, and like the feedback on what doesn't work well and what folks really like, so that as we cook the next version of Gemini, it sort of builds on all the things that folks are enjoying. So it really is like the start of this like massive combinatorial explosion of work that needs to happen, in order to like keep delivering the model to everyone. And it's become increasingly more difficult actually, which is another thing that I talked to Koray a few weeks ago, and he made the comment that like we've sort of figured out how to get models out the door, and to train great models, getting them sort of distributed across all of Google's product surfaces, and like making them readily available and making sure that that experience is great on day one is like a really, really difficult infrastructure product problem, coordination problem, even at the scale of like the number of humans involved at Google. So it's new problems to deal with all the time.
Because Flash was an even larger deployment than Gemini 3, right? And so was that because you learned from the Gemini 3 launch and you were able to apply those learnings to Flash, or was it for another reasons, just because of the model capabilities, as an example?
Yeah. I mean, I think principally it's actually like a compute story. Like I think if you could, well, it's a compute, but also like a model characteristic story. So on the compute side, like if we could deploy a Gemini 3 Pro to every single person in the world, like that would be great. The mission is, provide, intelligence and such for humanity and sort of make sure that it benefits people. So I think that is definitely in line with it. Though there is an interesting outcome, and we actually saw this. I'll use the AI Studio analogy just because like I'm more intimately familiar with that data. If you sort of like blindly A/B test Pro versus Flash for like vibe coding as an example, what you see, because the model quality is actually like somewhat comparable along certain dimensions, is when people use Flash, actually like more people use it. They like don't quit out as often, like midway through like an app being generated. They actually generate more apps on average. They like iterate more on the apps. So like all of these like interesting user metrics increase when you have this speed paradigm that's sort of much quicker than the Pro model. So I think there really is something magical about like being able to stay in flow state. So I do think there's lots of Google products that like search is a quintessential example of this. Like speed matters. Like they can't sort of take 2 minutes to answer like every single user query. Nobody would use search if that was a question. It's like the brand is in many cases like this lightning fast experience. So you need models that sort of have that characteristic as well.
It feels like as you're putting Gemini, just the broad Gemini family, into each of Google's suite of products, the majority of them probably benefit most from speed and from using Flash. What products do you think users should be using the Pro models, the higher token usage models?
That's a good question. I definitely think like professional coding is a great example of this. So if you're like a Google anti-gravity customer, I think that's a great place where you need to be using that model specifically. Even if like I know the sweet bench numbers are pretty solid for Flash, like there is like a little bit of a big model smell difference between Pro and Flash in certain cases. So it definitely, I think if you have enough time and you're willing to sit there and wait, like you might still want to use Pro. Creative writing is another one of this. Like I think if you sort of benefit from the breadth and the creativity of the model, I think that's something that Pro makes a lot of sense for. There's a lot of nuance to this, to be honest. Like even in my own testing, like it depends on, I've tried a bunch of different categories. It sort of depends on the prompts and what you're trying to do. Another one is, again, obviously the multimodal capability is really good with Flash and Pro. But I think there's some nuance to like different use cases. And I don't know I don't know this one off the top of my head, but like audio versus video versus like image, I think is actually a good thing to dive into and figure out like, do you get comparable performance across all three of those, or does the model skew in different ways? So I think it's a self-exploration in some contexts, but I do think like generally you are going to get more intelligence out of Pro. And it's at the trade-off of cost and latency. So if you're sort of cost and latency tolerant, then like Pro is a great option.
By the way, we need to get big model smell on a hat immediately. Really like that.
You can get it on the hat.
You.
We have sweatshirts. Our pre-training team, actually, we're getting them a bunch of really cool big model smell because their job is to make the big model. So yeah, we can get them externally as well. And
what is it about big models that allow it to be better at creativity? And that's such a hard thing to measure. So like talk a little bit about why a bigger model might be more creative, and then how you actually measure the delta between them.
Yeah, I think measuring creativity is definitely difficult. I think when we see my loose proxy for this, and I don't know if Koray is listening still, or I'm sure you to run to another meeting or something. So from a very like deeply research-centric perspective, somebody can gut check me on my assumption here. But my understanding is like basically you can approximate like model size, and this is like lots of hand wavy approximation. So Again, I'd love if somebody corrects me. You can approximate model size for sort of the breadth and in some cases the depth of understanding. And basically what the model is doing when it answers a question is it's like state space search across parameters. And in practice, the larger your state space, the more chance that you see an output. They're like potentially like more breadth in outputs there are, and thus the higher the chance you have of like getting something that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. Versus like you'd expect from a smaller model, like the state space is a little bit smaller, and therefore, the potential to get things you haven't seen before, whether or not they're novel or creative, in practice, or whether it's just sort of a reformulation of something else that seems novel and creative to you, even though it's not in the entirety of the world's context novel or creative. So that's been my intuition historically, but I think there's nuance, and I'm sure that there's things on the research side that folks are doing to push even the small models to have that sort of that variance and that creativity.
Yeah, when it comes to
yeah.
creative writing, I haven't been able to fully trust any AI model, to be frank. Like I'll use it for so much leading up to actually writing words. And for example, I wouldn't have it post on X for me. I wouldn't have it write a newsletter. These are all things that I still think handwritten by humans is still the optimal way to go.
I agree
Logan,
with this.
have you ever written an X post with Gemini?
No expos with Gemini. I think there's something really interesting, and I've had this conversation with folks. There's many dimensions to this. I could opine for a long time, but um, if I look at like how I use AI in my personal and professional life, like I don't use it for writing stuff at all. And part of this is like I have a attachment to the words that represent me. And I want to represent my ideas like from my perspective. I also think like actually very to put a different point on it, like I also think I have a unique perspective, and like distilling my unique perspective into the context that the model needs to fully represent that unique perspective, like is not something that comes trivial to me. Like I don't know how to actually do that, which I think there's lots of people, and I think you all are actually great examples of this. You have lots of interesting context and perspective that like making content from that is hard. You just have to do a lot of work to make this happen. And it's interesting that like there's like certain mediums where I don't feel this is true. Like I have posted a nano banana image before. I have posted a VO video before. I have written AI code and sort of like not like nefariously represented it as my own, but like it's my app. I built this thing, even though like really an AI model wrote all that code for me. So there is something interesting about like the plainness of human written text that we have this attachment to, and there's all these other mediums in which we don't have this attachment, which is interesting.
Yeah,
It's really well
I
said.
love the way you put that. It's a
Yeah.
representation of yourself, myself. I absolutely love that. That's such a concise way of talking about why the written word from a human is so important. And also it trains our brain. When we write, it actually helps clarify our ideas to sand off the rough edges of those ideas, and it's all part of the human process of solidifying ideas. So I think in that sense, it's also just as important.
100%. It's fun too. I really do. I love that process of like it's this I'm like exploring like similar that example I gave of creativity where sort of the model is exploring its own like parameter state space. Like that is basically what happens when I write, which is what I enjoy. I'm like exploring my own mind's parameter state space of trying to figure out like what is my actual perspective about these things. And it is sort of in some sense it's a therapeutic process where you can sort of like decouple a bunch of ideas and try to articulate them in an interesting way, in a way that convinces people or whatever it is. So it's fun. I hope I get to continue to write in the future.
I want to talk about something that we talked to Robbie Stein about a few weeks ago, which is dynamic UIs. And this obviously, since he's running search for Google, this was within the context of search results having dynamic UI elements, UX elements in Google search created generatively by AI during like prompting time. How do you think about that? Where else in the Google suite of products are you seeing dynamically generated UIs, UX be potentially useful?
Yeah, my worldview is that this is going to be a foundational capability of these models, and actually a foundational product experience across the board. There's actually, as I like squint my eyes, I see like pretty much everywhere you want to be able to have this sort of dynamically generated experience. In some cases, it'll be like much more subtle. In some cases, it'll be like much more expansive. But I do think you'll see that as like a foundation. I think it'll be like yet another way in which this like AI UX, we can call that one AI UX 3.0. I feel like 1.0 was this like LLM chatbot era. I think the AI UX 2.0 was, voice and being able to sort of communicate with that. I think the third version of this is going to be like softwares, like personalized software slash generative UI, sort of in real time building the thing that solves your problem. So I think all three of those things continue to work, but I do think it's great that we're getting more of them. Because I think again, if you remember back to like the narrative like 2 years ago, it was like, nobody wants chatbots anymore. Everyone wants to do something else. And like it actually wasn't clear like oftentimes the UX experience is guided by the model capabilities. And again, the unlock from a generative UX standpoint was you actually got models that were good enough and fast enough at generating code that you could actually do this and calling tools that they were actually able to do a bunch of this stuff. So it was cool to see the like model capabilities continue to unlock new product experiences, and it makes it great to be a builder.
This is such a fascinating area. I'm curious, how do you see this playing out in practice? Like, what are some examples that we might be seeing in the wild soon?
Yeah. I mean, I'm spitballing, so I don't know if this is on the Google Docs product roadmap, but like I can imagine this for Google Docs or just like sort of information sharing as you like write. You also have sort of, generative UIs built for you. I think there's lots of examples. Like I can imagine this in lots of messaging apps. I feel like it feels very normal that you would potentially do something like that, of these like little mini experiences or like widgets that sort of get created for you as like to scaffold the conversation successfully. So I feel like those are two experiences where like I could very quickly see there being a lot of utility, novelty, and interest from people to be able to do something like that.
Logan, as generating UX, UI gets better, I think you can extrapolate that eventually it might be able to generate the entire application in real time, the kind of exact use case you're looking for in that moment. And there's been a lot of talk about what happens to SaaS and what happens to applications in general. Can you opine a bit about that?
I was just talking to someone about this earlier this week, and sort of my perspective is it'll be interesting. My guess is there'll be sort of a bifurcation in what the market offers. In a lot of cases, actually, you want, and I'm thinking about like the um, enterprise company as an example. The enterprise company, like, is it really a feature that everyone's software is different and that there's sort of all these weird edge cases? And like, how do you make sure that you're sort of, processing data and sort of coming to conclusions in the same way? Like, I have a hard time imagining that you would want this sort of like personal software built in real time to then be the thing that is like distributed across like many thousands of people. I can imagine that for myself for some like very like one-off more throwaway use cases. I think it starts to make a lot of sense. But I still think there'll be a lot of value in being able to like build reliable software that can be used across many people to ensure explicitly there's this like ensuring that people are getting the same experience, which I think is the part that has to continue to happen. So, I mean, again, you could potentially generate one of those pieces of software, but then like how, again, for like, if you're a company, how do you making sure that it's like actually doing the things that you want it to be able to do? And like the requirements gathering of like one person versus, a team of many people is actually really difficult. So I think we're still like, I still think that's like more on the horizon from a impact perspective than like, hey, I have this very thin problem that I want to solve, and I'm trying to solve it for myself, and I want to be able to do that using this like personal software paradigm.
Yeah, and but Google is currently doing some dynamic UX serving through search. So how do you make sure that the experience stays consistent, the end result of what's being generated is actually what the user wants? How do you put those guardrails on it, especially at the scale that Google's operating at?
Yeah, it's a good question for search because I think actually search is the example that I'm talking about where like I feel like this type of product experience actually works quite well. I think like when people go to search, they're not like make me an entire SaaS application that sort of has multi-tenancy, multi-cloud strategy. I can sign in, make a database, do all these things.
Make
Like
no
people are
mistakes.
going to yeah, people are going to search, and like Robbie has a bunch of great examples, like the Gen UI use cases of today around, you know, you're trying to understand some sort of physics simulation, and sort of like I want to understand how like the foils work and how air moves on the wings of an airplane, or how like liquids move through a complex system. Like those are great examples, I feel like, of something where you can sort of spin up the software. It's
Mhm.
ephemeral. Maybe it's actually repurposable across a larger set of users, and sort of there's this notion of like software becoming content in and of itself. So you can imagine that like that artifact of software lives on. And I was talking to Ree, who's the UX lead for like AI stuff in search, and she was saying she was like using Gen UX to understand and describe to her kids like how car engines work. And like that's a great question where it's like actually like millions of people I'm sure have that question of like how do car engines work. I have that question. I have no idea. Every time I get in a car, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense to me, but I'm sure there's something interesting happening here. And like again, to be able to repurpose that software as content for the next million people, and actually like principally, ideally in some cases, like not have to regenerate it. Like why waste the tokens? Of like remaking the same simulation over and over and over again. Can you just have a base simulation that gets forked? And these are all the types of problems that I think like the search team and Google are so well. It's very much the problems we've been trying to solve for the last 20 years with search. So I feel like they're up for the task, which is cool.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? The search example is a great one. And I'm sure behind the scenes, it's obviously much harder to accomplish, but you can make the leap, right? You can make the leap from what's happening in the search experience. How do car engines work as an example? You get your YouTube videos, you get your images, maybe you get your search results, the knowledge graph. Like there are components that you can see building into something that's maybe more interactive or more generative, more personalized. So that's a great example. Logan, it's been a very impressive year at Google. I feel like you have ended the year with a bang. What's next? What does Q1 look like over there?
Q1 is going to be incredibly busy. I think December is the time of year where everyone's hopes and ambitions about wanting to get stuff off, like you have the conversation a lot of, okay, I guess we'll do that in January, because you just run out of like basically have half a month, which is unfortunate. So I think we've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline that I'm super excited about, across models, across, developer stuff in AI Studio and the APIs. So it's a great time to be building on and with the Gemini models, and I couldn't be more excited. Hopefully I can be the number one return guest, and we'll ship a bunch of stuff early January, and we can keep making it happen.
Yeah, well, we had you on for Gemini 3. We're now having you on for Flash. Can we expect you before the end of the year again?
I think the teams are going to sleep. People have to rest.
It's my cheeky way of asking if you got something up your sleeve for the end of the year. Logan, as always, much appreciated. Come on the show anytime. Official Logan K on X. And of course, check out Gemini, check out AI Studio. Logan, thank you. Come back again.
Thank you both. Happy holidays.
You too.
Happy holidays. Talk soon. All right. Well, Mr. Matthew, we're just going to go right into our fourth and final guest.
Yeah, I mean, with this level of guests, we should just stop talking ourselves.
There's no point in us talking. Yeah.
No, let's get into it.
All right. So our next guest is running product at one of the hottest fintech companies. And I'll allow him to fact check my numbers here. But 27 million customers, more than 340 billion in AUC, assets under custody, an evaluation of over 100 billion. They're also shipping like crazy, similar to Google. across their trading platform, crypto, social, and most recently, prediction markets. That company is Robinhood, and that man is Abashek. Welcome to the show. Did I get that pronunciation right, by the way?
I think you might be muted, Abhishek.
Hold on.
There
There we
we go.
go.
Got it.
Okay. Thank
We're
you
in
for having
business.
me. Yeah, and thanks for the flattering comments. I pay more attention to the product velocity, so that's certainly right.
Great, fantastic. Well, we're going to talk a lot about that today. You know, I actually want to start by saying I've been using Robinhood for a long time now. I started when it was just a mobile trading platform. A lot has changed since that day. How do you even describe what Robinhood is today?
Well, Robinhood today, as Vlad likes to call it, is a financial super app. We want to be the one-stop shop for all of your finances, and we're slowly building towards that. It started with no commissions, stocks, and ETFs. Then we expanded to options, crypto, futures, prediction markets. Now we have a credit card, and we're rolling out a banking product as well. So we're slowly getting there.
Abhishek, I think everybody's been talking about prediction markets lately. Maybe just let's define what that actually is. How would you describe prediction markets in the context of Robinhood?
Yeah, I mean, prediction markets are a burgeoning asset class. They're new. I think they're still in their early innings, but I think they're a way for customers who especially are active traders to monetize their specific expertise. And then also for customers who are consumers of information, they can get valuable information out of prediction markets on how to make other investment decisions. So it's actually a really useful tool, both from a trading standpoint and also from an information gathering standpoint.
And so, real quick, can you just go through what the actual logistics of investing in a prediction, or how do you describe it, and then go through the steps of what it actually means?
Yeah. So you're investing or trading an outcome. So you're expressing a point of view on what a particular outcome is going to be. You're buying a contract, and if that outcome ends up being true, you end up getting $1 for whatever purchase price you did. So for example, we started with the election contract last year, where customers could predict who was going to win the presidential election. And a lot of our customers use that to hedge their economic risk because the elections have a big impact on the economy. A lot of them were expressing their view on the election, and a lot of them were also using it as an information source to understand how the elections were trending on poll day.
And but it's not like investing in a stock where you own this piece of value. It can go up, it can go down. With investing in a prediction, it is pretty binary, right? You're either going to win the prediction or you're going to lose the prediction.
Yeah, it's a binary outcome typically, but one of the really cool parts of prediction markets is you can also exit your position early. So if you enter into a contract and the contract depreciates, you don't have to wait for the outcome to resolve to actually exit your position.
Interesting. So I think the pushback you hear in the media about prediction markets is the casinofication or the financialization of information. Do you completely reject that premise? Do you think of it differently, or is it more nuanced where you just have to do them right? Build them in the right way, design them in the right way?
I think it's nuanced. I think for us, what we like to do is think about our customers, right? Our first pillar of our strategy is to be number one in active traders. When you talk to our active traders, a lot of them spend a lot of time understanding the world, understanding stocks, understanding companies, and becoming experts in their domain. And they want to be able to trade or monetize their opinion. And prediction markets are a really interesting way to do that because you can express a very specific point of view. For example, the Fed rate outcome is a very popular contract that customers use to hedge their risk or even trade the outcome of interest rates. On a secondary level, it's also a really interesting information source on what's going to happen because the wisdom of the crowd can kind of tell you what the likelihood of a particular outcome is. One contract that's been interesting to me, and Vlad actually had it up behind him in the keynote, was the Warner Brothers acquisition. Who's going to end up acquiring Warner Brothers? It actually flipped the day of our keynote from Paramount to Netflix. So it's actually a really interesting way to understand the likelihood of different outcomes. And a customer may end up making different investment decisions based off of these prediction markets.
Where does that prediction stand today, by the way? I've lost track.
I haven't looked at the latest, but I think as of our Tuesday keynote, Netflix was more likely to acquire Warner Brothers than Paramount.
Interesting.
Can you talk about the bull case for financializing everything and like for the Fed rate as a way to hedge your bet or kind of the hedge investments and other types of investments like but like when you start talking about what Taylor Swift is going to be wearing, what President Trump what words he's going to say in a certain speech, like what it feels a little odd to me, but like how do I get excited about this? How do I know this is a good thing for society?
Yeah, I think that we're in the early innings, and I think this market is being formed. What I like to think about is like the world is interconnected in a lot of different ways, right? So we recently added weather contracts. So where you can predict the outcome, what the weather's going to be, rain, snowfall. And you can say some people are just trading the weather because they have a specific point of view on the weather because they live in that particular region. But weather also impacts economic events. It impacts elections, you know. Typically, if it's downpouring during an election, voter turnout tends to be lower. And election and weather ends up being linked to elections in that way. Weather ends up being linked to how retail goes out and buys stuff at the physical store. So the world is so linked and interconnected. It actually is very useful to understand these tools, to understand how different outcomes are going to happen in the world. So I think over time, what's going to end up happening is these types of contracts are going to be ways to understand how different information is flowing and what's likely to happen.
And I think the last thing a lot of folks in the media have been talking about is the notion of insider trading or kind of having this early information and it informing predictions. Like what do you think overall that would be a good thing to have more accurate predictions or a bad thing giving folks, a small set of folks, unfair advantage against other predictors?
Yeah, this is something we take really seriously. And I actually think financial markets in a lot of ways were built for this. In the equities and options markets, there's been decades of infrastructure built around controlling for insider trading. We take it very seriously. We have our trade surveillance teams that look at stuff. And I actually think this is an area where prediction markets over the long term are going to have are going to have an edge over other products because financial markets were sort of built for this sort of thing. We've invested a lot in our equity markets around insider trading, and we'll be able to take a lot of that infrastructure and apply it as these markets grow.
So, and just to be clear, aside from the legality today, do you think it is a good thing to have folks trading on information that they're learning earlier than others?
I think that, I mean, different people have different expertise, right? So for example, I know people who study very closely certain companies. They don't necessarily work there, but they follow these companies really closely. And if they're studying them, if they're understanding what they think these businesses are going to do, in the same way that they can buy a stock, which they think is underpriced, they should be able to predict the outcome of a particular event. So I think in terms of people being able to monetize their expertise, it's very valuable. Obviously, insider trading is something that's very serious, and I think financial markets are kind of built to control for these types of things.
Interesting. Well, yeah. So interested to get your perspective specifically as someone who heads up product at Robinhood. You have a spectrum of products and they vary in their risk profile. So on one end, you might have retirement accounts, very low risk, very stable. And on the other end, you might have prediction markets, especially for the layman who's misinformed or uninformed. Do you, from a product standpoint specifically, are you trying to separate those two things or are they a part of the same story?
Yeah, I think one thing I like to think a lot about is money segments in people's head. It's not even necessarily customer segments. So if you talk to our active traders, a lot of them will tell you, I have my bucket of money that I use for active trading or that I use for a particular thing. And then I also have my retirement savings. I also have my cash savings. I also have my long-term investments. So they don't necessarily like view them view themselves as purely an active trader. They view a particular part of their money as their active trading money. And then what they tell us is, I want to do all of this on Robinhood because Robinhood has the best experience. Robinhood has the best economics. So for us, it's about serving all the different kinds of money that customers tend to have, because they're pretty sophisticated about how they budget for these different types of buckets in their mind. And it comes back to sort of our three pillars, right? Which is number one, in active trading. A lot of customers tend to have a small amount of money set aside for them to actively trade and actively invest themselves, which is their own opinions. They have their passive money and their wallet share and their long-term investments. That's kind of where we're focused second, which is number one in wallet share, which is to become a larger and larger portion of our customers' wealth. And the number three is going international. So for us, it's less about customer segments and more about serving all of the customers' money segments.
Understood.
I want to change gears for a second, Abhishek. We talk a lot about artificial intelligence on this show, and so I want to ask you, how does Robinhood think about AI, integrating AI into each of the products, and then using AI as an investment partner, as an analyst? What are you doing today, and what's the vision for how AI integrates into Robinhood?
Yeah. So back in March, we announced Robinhood Cortex, which is the intelligence layer on Robinhood. The first thing we rolled out to customers was Stock Digest. It looks like a really simple feature, but it was actually really hard to build because customers open the app every morning, they see a stock's moving by 5%, and the first question is, why did the stock move? So we aggregate a lot of real-time market data, news, analyst ratings, trends on Robinhood to try to give them a succinct explanation for why the stock may have moved. Then we expanded that to crypto, ETFs, and now as of Tuesday, we're working on bringing it to your portfolio level so you can understand how your portfolio moved. We've also been building active trader workflows with AI to simplify their workflows. So that's something that's really important to us. And in the background, we've been investing deeply in customer support. So all of those three things culminated in Cortex being an assistant inside of Robinhood, which we announced back on Tuesday at our event, which customers will be able to use and talk to, interact with their accounts, explore the Robinhood product, and understand the markets as a whole. I think the vision that we see is threefold. First is for active traders. A lot of active traders are like entrepreneurs. They want to trade. They want to proactively manage their own finances. So AI for them can be a very useful tool and companion to optimize their workflows. The second is personalization. A lot of our customers, like you said, they want to use different products. Not every product is for every customer. So how can we personalize the app to exactly what they need? And then the third, over the longer term, is how can we use AI to give people advice? So that's kind of where we see it's headed.
So you mentioned advice. Do you ever see some of your users connecting their accounts to Gemini 3, ChatGPT, and just letting it run it? And if so, what kind of performance are they seeing?
That's not something we actively support. I know a lot of customers try using the foundation models to manage their portfolios, something we see on social a lot. Kind of what we feel is like we're in the best position to build the best financial assistant, because what we've learned from our experience in the past year is to build a great financial assistant, you need great data sources. You need to understand the customer's portfolio and account, and you need to understand the brokerage stack and the brokerage markets. And in order to do that, you kind of need all the tools that we have. So when we were building Robinhood Cortex, we actually asked a lot of the same questions that we asked Cortex of some of the foundation models. And because they don't have the same real-time market data coming into them as we do, we actually think we're in position over the long term to build a better financial AI for customers.
But you're focused on active traders, but maybe for my mom and somebody who just wants to be a passive trader and let AI take over, is that something that you are going to be doing in the future?
Yeah, that's something we want to look at. I think the starting point has been the portfolio digest, right? I have a portfolio, maybe I've invested in 10 stocks, and I just want to understand how it's doing. Right now, to put together that picture is like a lot of work, whether you're an active trader or you're a passive investor. So we can do that with Robinhood Cortex. It's really seamless. It feels very natural. And I think the third pillar of what I said about AI, of it managing your finances and helping you do more and more, is probably the pillar that's going to take the longest. We're going to have to work closely with the regulators to make sure it's correct, it's doing well, it's cogent, but it's something we definitely think we can do over the long term.
What do you think the main differences are between that, what you just described, versus I believe it's called Robinhood Strategies today, your robo-advising tool? Like, what are the core differences between those two things?
So Robinhood Strategies is our digital advisor. We have customers fill out questionnaires on what are their portfolio preferences, their risk tolerance, and then we manage their portfolios with them. What Robinhood Strategies does is it also invests in single stocks. Where we think AI can help long-term here is deepening the personalization in that product. If you look at typical digital advisors, Robinhood Strategies is actually fairly unique in this regard. But if you look at the typical digital advisor, you'll answer a question and you'll kind of get matched to like one of X portfolios that tends to be ETFs. We think that AI can help personalize it and kind of replicate some of the personalization and the financial planning you might need from your advisor as well.
Got it.
As AI continues to get better, and maybe even Robinhood, you're developing your own AI to do investment. It feels akin to the high frequency trading race, where really like everybody has the same algorithm, and then it's a function of how close can we get to the network and to the actual trading floor, and we're talking about millisecond differences, and so. Is it at that point when everybody has really good AI? Is it just a function of how much compute can we throw at it, and that's who's going to win the investment? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, when everyone has a Rentech in their pocket, how do you actually find alpha anymore?
Yeah, my point of view here is it's actually fairly hard to do this because to build this really well, you need a lot of real-time data. Like a lot of these, a great assistant in investing will rely on having real-time market data, real-time technical data, real-time fundamentals, accurate news sources, first-party data from the companies. And typically the products that are aggregating these things are the brokerages, they are the financial apps. When you're trying to build a very generalist product, you're not spending all the time that we're spending integrating with all the exchanges to get real-time data. And in that world, having a 5 to 10 to 15 minute lag on market data can be a gigantic difference, So we feel like we're in pole position to build the best financial AI with Robinhood Cortex.
So with 2026 right around the corner, what are your big priorities, or what are your team's big priorities for the coming year?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we think about the business in 3 pillars. So the first is number 1 in active trading. I think you're going to continue to see us do more there. I can't share the specifics of the roadmap, but we have a lot of exciting things coming.
We won't tell anyone.
Oh, I heard this was being live streamed. So, but we launched Robinhood Legend last year. That was our active trader dedicated platform. We're going to keep improving that, bring new innovations to that. On our second pillar, which is number 1 in wallet share, we've done a lot over the last couple of years. We've rolled out retirement. We have one of the fastest growing retirement products in the market. We rolled out joint accounts. We're hoping to do a lot more there to serve more of people's wallets and more of their financial needs. And on the third, number 1 global financial ecosystem, you're going to see us continue to expand internationally. And we're going to keep doing these product events. So I would stay tuned.
And last question, as we continue to see prediction markets evolve, what are you most excited about in 2026 for prediction markets?
I think what I'm most excited about prediction markets is obviously right now we see sports being a lot of the volume. I think that's just the tip of the spear. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in the other categories like crypto prediction markets, weather prediction markets, company-related prediction markets, and all the other categories. And I think what I'm really excited to see is how can we turn these prediction markets into very valuable data sources and news sources for customers on Robinhood who are trading everything, right? They're not just trading prediction markets, they're trading equities, options, futures, crypto, and event contracts. So how can we harmonize the entire ecosystem? I think that's something only we can do.
So. And is there an opportunity to have a prediction or a prediction market be more akin to an equity in which you're investing in this thing? It's a little bit more passive and it's something where it can increase in value over time, or is it kind of perpetually going to be the binary outcome that you described earlier?
Um, I don't have a great answer to that question, but I think it has a lot of great use cases from a long-term investing perspective as well, right? If I have a long-term portfolio and I want to hedge my risk on interest rates, I can use prediction markets to do that. If I've deeply studied a particular company's earnings and I really believe in it, but I'm like worried about short-term earnings, I can use prediction markets to hedge that outcome. So I think for long-term investors, it can be a really powerful complementary tool. And Vlad mentioned this on Tuesday, but I think it's going to disrupt, we think it's going to disrupt other industries as well. We see some customers and some institutions looking at weather contracts as an alternative to insurance. So we think, we're going to see a lot of growth in the other categories next year.
All right, Abhishek, thank you so much for
Yeah,
joining us today. Go follow him on X, Abhishek F96, and of course, check out Robinhood, robinhood.com. Abhishek, thank you so much.
it was great meeting you.
Good to meet you as
See you
well.
later. Happy holidays.
All right.
Fun show, Matt. Great
Yeah.
show.
Yeah. Incredibly interesting. I am just starting to learn about prediction markets, so definitely want to learn more. Um, just starting to dabble. Maybe I should make a bet or a prediction, I should say, on what Taylor Swift is going to be wearing next, or when she's actually going to get married. And I don't know. That's awesome.
You've said that you have dabbled though. What specifically? Anything worth sharing?
Um, no, I mean, I tried the sports a little bit, although I'm not like hugely into sports, so there wasn't really much
Didn't have a lot of
information that I had
confidence in
that
that
somebody
one.
else didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Cool.
nothing too much. I just wanted to try it out, try the interface.
Nice.
All right, so that's our show. I want to thank our guests, Doug O'Loughlin, President SemiAnalysis. Go check out SemiAnalysis. Koray, Chief AI Architect at Google. Logan Kilpatrick, and Abhishek from Robinhood. Nick, thank you again, as always, for co-hosting.
Thank you, Matt. And by the way, shout out to Box for sponsoring the show today. Big fans of them over there. Appreciate it.
Yes, they power a lot of what we do. And thanks to everybody who's watching. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Forward Future. Check out our newsletter, forwardfuture.ai. And we'll see you soon.
See you next time.